Welcome news for Canadians still struggling to get by as the COVID-19 pandemic just continues. I know there's a lot of COVID fatigue. The virus doesn't care. The Canada Emergency Response Benefit, which is the wildly popular program, will be officially extended by 8 weeks, which means Canadians who are enrolled in the program when it was launched can keep receiving financial aid until the end of the summer. But, as the Prime Minister says, it will be a long journey ahead before the economy is back to normal. So could the CERB stay around even longer, and how much will it cost? Let's dig into that and other issues with the Minister of Employment and Workforce Development. Carla Qualtrough joins us again. Minister, always good to have you back. You're rapidly becoming a co-host on the program. Why the extension by 8 weeks?
Well, Evan, we know that as much as we had some positive news in terms of job numbers last month, we're a long way from being out of the woods on this in terms of economic hit and workers who are struggling to find work and won't be able to find work this summer. So we've extended the CERB by 8 weeks, as you said, to 24 weeks. So within the period of March 15th to October 3rd, workers can claim up to 24 weeks of the CERB.
Will the eligibility requirements change? For example, the president and CEO of the Canadian Federation of Small Businesses, Dan Kelly, says, why don't you just make sure that, if you earn more than $1,000 a month, which you're allowed to do, but $1 over and you can't collect the $2,000 a month from the CERB, will that criteria change and you'll let people maybe earn a little more to allow them to get back into the workforce without having to sacrifice the CERB support?
Well, that's not changing for now, Evan. So what we've decided is we'll keep the benefit level at $500 and the allowable earnings at $1,000. In an ideal world, we would indeed have a more working well-on-claim-like system like we do in EI, where people can, gradually earn up to a certain amount and money is taken kind of at $1 to $2 at a time. But the reality is our system doesn't have that capacity. We had to set a threshold. We determined a while back it was $1,000, and we continue to believe that's the best level of allowable earnings for people on this benefit.
There are some questions that if you want, I understand the beginning, the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit, it was popular, it got the money out the door, and 8.4 million Canadians are using it. I appreciate that right now. But the feature of it was to keep people out of work. Now you're trying to get people back at work. Why not transfer people off the CERB onto EI if they can't get work? That would allow the system to end, but you put people on the EI system.
Well, that's a really important question, and acknowledging the fact that CERB wasn't actually built to transition people back to work is super important. But the reality is that a significant number of people who are getting the CERB aren't eligible for EI. So if we just flat out transition people to EI tomorrow or 1st of July, too many people right now would be left behind who don't have work or who aren't working for childcare reasons or sickness reasons. Eventually, absolutely, people who are EI eligible will be transitioned back to that system, and we're going to have to take a look at how we continue to support people who aren't EI eligible. But we determined that right now wasn't that time to do it.
Okay, so now this is an 8-week extension. Is the government open to more extending? Maybe, there could be a second wave. This could go longer.
Well, I think you've asked two different questions there. So right now, the CERB, we are not intending to extend it beyond this additional 8-week period. If at some point in the future, say the fall or early next year, there was a second wave, of course, we'd have to look at what support for Canadian workers would look like at that time. Hopefully, lesson learned from CERB. Hopefully, we've transitioned people back into an EI system that's more capable of sophisticatedly addressing work realities at that time. But right now, the plan is 8 weeks, and that's it.
Okay, so I just want people to know, this is it. The government's saying 8 weeks for now, that's it. Then let's talk about the cost. You were on this program last week saying it's $17 billion a month. I spoke to the parliamentary budget officer. He said that must be at the peak. How did you get that number, and what do you think, what is the estimate for the next 8 weeks of costs?
Well, really, thank you for allowing me to share the math. So as of June 4th, it was a $44 billion cost to the CERB. So that's half of March. all of April, all of May. It was $44 billion. The most expensive month was $17 billion dollars. That's where I got my $17 billion figure. At the very most, with 8 million people on the CERB, which we actually don't expect 8 million people to stay on the CERB, it's a $17 billion price ticket a month. The reality is, already 1.2 million Canadians are off the CERB that were on it a month ago. The reality is we now have 2.6 million Canadians on the wage subsidy. We're right now determining how many of those were from CERB. So it's not going to cost that much, but it's better to have a maximum than to underestimate cost.
Nearly 8.5 million applications for CERB were approved, 453,000 for the wage subsidy. I keep asking the question, is the wage subsidy, I don't know, what is going wrong with that? You guys clearly underestimated CERB and overestimated the wage subsidy.
Well, I'm not sure it's quite, I wouldn't put it that way, but I understand what you're getting at. We haven't had the uptake on the wage subsidy that we had expected. We're looking at why that is. As I said, we have employers who just don't know how many people they want to hire back, whether it's at a 75% subsidy or not. We've got people who are earning up to $1,000 on the CERB, so we've got more part-time workers. There's a number of explanations. We also have changes to the wage subsidy, the effects of which we probably won't see for a couple more weeks. So it's still, we're still trying to figure that out. You're not wrong, and we're working on it.
Okay, two things. Mexico's stopping sending temporary foreign workers over COVID-19 infections. This is a big issue. People underestimate how important temporary foreign workers are to much of our labor force, certainly in agriculture, and yet the conditions they work under are pretty brutal. What will that change, and what protections will these workers have?
Well, first of all, of course, our condolences to the families of the temporary foreign workers from Mexico who lost their life to COVID. It's a tragedy. We feel just awful that this has happened when they've come here to help us. To your point, this is about food security for Canadians. This is about making sure Canadians have food on their tables, and we have a lot of people from around the world helping us make sure that happens. The reality is this is yet another crisis that has been brought to the forefront in terms of how people are treated, the working conditions. We've really worked hard, having said that, since the beginning. I've been working with the Mexican ambassador, as has my colleague, from the beginning when we put in place quarantine measures for temporary foreign workers. Mexico was confident in those measures, and quite frankly, those measures protected workers, and we didn't have any outbreaks during the quarantine period. What's now happened, as workers have started working, they've gone out into our communities, and they've gotten sick. And so we need to figure out, is it their working conditions, their living conditions, pay level, what are the things? And as I've said a couple of times today now, starting next week, we need to increase our investigations. We need to get public health officials into these farms where there are outbreaks. We need to make sure workers have the information, that they know that they can access CERB, that they have options and choices, because this really is unacceptable.
All right, we're going to talk about this later, but do you support Metro, Loblaw, and Sobeys all pulled their pandemic pay of $2 extra an hour? They're making record profits, executive bonuses, and they pulled that. Do you support, or do you want them to stand before this parliamentary committee and answer why they're pulling the pandemic pay? And are you concerned that they all just happen to do it on the same day?
Well, first of all, I would encourage businesses to continue to pay workers. We're not at all through this crisis. We're still clearly in a pandemic. My preference would, of course, personally have been for them to keep the pay at what it was, but they need to make their choices, and they need to be held accountable for them.
All right, I got to leave it there. Minister Qualtrough, always good to have you on the program. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Nice to talk to you.